Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our special session, Designing Authentic Assessments. I am Dr. Laura Bristol, Program Manager for Human Resource Development here at the CARICOM Secretariat. And we are very pleased to have you with us. You would know that we are in Zoom and we are also streaming live on Facebook. And this was really because of the overwhelming response that we had to the opportunity to participate and share in this event. We have with us an interesting program. We had to redesign the program when we saw the huge volume of people making a request to participate. So the program is going to take you through some stimulus. So we're going to share some information with you first, and then we're going to present 3 stints. We are calling it stints, and those stints are actually going to be presented and were developed by teachers like yourself from within the Caribbean region. When they come on, they will introduce themselves, and they're classroom teachers in early childhood, primary education, and secondary education. We want this to be an authentic experience. So the experience that we will take you through, we would be focusing extensively on the notion of authentic assessment. And we want to ensure that when you walk away from this experience, that the experience is one that you can go into the classroom tomorrow, please God, and try out some of the things that we shared with you today. Critical to know, all the persons who registered for this session will receive at the end of the session an e-booklet which would have examples and guidance on how to design your own authentic assessment for the particular levels that you're involved in. With that, I will now hand over to our first presenter. Her name is Dr. Camille Dixon Dean, and she comes from the University of Technology in Australia, and Camille will take us through our first note. So Camille, over to you.
So I think it's important for me to at least start with my camera on so that you can see before I put the slides up, and you can see what I look like, because once I do that, I can't see much. So welcome everyone. I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago. I have a very cosmopolitan family myself. My husband's from Barbados, and we're now located in Australia. So welcome. I'm missing that warm weather that's there right now. It's spring. It's leaving winter, going into spring, so it's pretty cold here. I have my shawl on. So we're going to discuss, and I'm going to just progress the slides as I move on. We're going to move on and discuss a lot about authentic assessments and what they're really about. One thing I would like to suggest to you, if you have any questions, you can post them in the chat windows. Right? You have the ones that are in Zoom, as well as we have ones that are on Facebook Live if you're there. And we'll have someone direct me there and I'll answer them as I need to. So what we're going to discuss today is really why we assess, because you can't discuss about authentic assessments without understanding the reasons behind and the history behind why we assess. We're going to discuss some assessment myths, some challenges, and how authentic assessments can help you with these challenges. So assessment historically is linked to the quality of education. It was originally created in a way so that we can measure what the student's progress is in an institutional environment. So from the first time schools were initiated, it was always taught that, yes, they're learning, but how can we know that they have learned? Also, it was, in essence, to measure the teacher's delivery via these assessments. This is something we don't really focus on anymore. We tend to focus mainly on the student's progress as an instrument or tool to see their progress. What is happening since then, as we linked the assessment now to the quality frameworks that existed in all institutions, we realized that quality of education is a systemic tool. That assessment is a systemic tool and is applied systemically within the environment. One thing I want to say is I use a lot of quotes, and as we go along, you'll see me putting a little bit of quotes inside of the slides, just remind us of why we do what we do as educators. And this quote by John Holt is one that really resounds with me. It leaves an imprint in most of the things of what I do. Learning is not a product of teaching. Learning is a product of the activity of the learners. And measuring that activity is what we hope to do in assessment. May I suggest to those who have their cameras off to just turn their cameras off to help the bandwidth with those who may be streaming or seeing as well, please. Okay. So when we go back to having a quality education system that we use, we see that the measurements tie deeply within the regimen of the organizations. So the measuring of the students' progress and understanding is something the system would measure, whereas the measure of the teacher's delivery is systemic or of the system and individualized towards the teacher. But what is missing is the student as an individual measure for their own learning. And that's one thing that we have to remember in assessments. We're looking at a judgment of the students to guide their own learning as well. And that's one thing that we tend to just ignore sometimes. So as we go through this, we see that when a student is allowed to guide their own learning, that quote that you saw from Holt, where you can see their activities coming to fruition, it has value to the students. We're quickly progressing, and now we're going to discuss some myths. A lot of us have a lot of myths. Do you guys, and you can use the chat window to do this, do you have any common myths that you have about assessments? And I'll leave that for about 2 minutes to see as people settle in, because people are coming in and fixing their audios. Maybe anyone from the panel can say any assessment myths you're aware of. So Laura says, identifying any common myths you have, and it's in the chat. Don't be shy. This is allowing some of our peers also some time to organize their audio and their video. Challenges. Learning is done through memorization. That's a very good myth from Shanice. Thank you. And that's a true, we'll discuss that a little later, and that's a very true myth that occurs. Any other myths that you can think of? Past performance is a very good one. Past performance of assessment is a prediction of future performance. That's a really good one from Paula. Brendan says that summative assessments are more valuable than formative ones. That's a perfect one right there. Assessments should be more than a summative form. Brad says multiple choice is not a valid assessment. That is very true as well. Paula says tests and examinations are the best way to assess. These are perfect myths that we have there, and they're going to continue as I progress. You will see that some of them, Candice says only exams can be used as assessments. Your grade reflects your learning. Yes, we're getting a little traction now. Assessments must be hard and make students suffer to show learning. That came from Facebook. Beautiful. Yes, that's true. Assessments can only be effective if they're done by an exam. That's also another myth. One myth that I'm going to highlight, and you guys keep going with those myths because I'll come back to them. Assessment is the same as a test, same as testing. Tests are a form of assessment. Assessments are not only tests. That's one thing we have to remember. You can assess a student, and a test does not have to be the only form of way of assessing them. Test improves our delivery and thus student learning. There's little evidence to support that. And I think if I was correct, someone hinted to that in the chat window. Can't remember who it was. But yes, test is not the only way you can assess your student learning nor your delivery. Another one is assessing more will get better outcomes. So the more tests they do, the better they improve. And that's also a common myth that is used. And finally, comparing students improve learning outcomes. Everyone learns differently, so every journey will be different. So that talks to a lot of the other myths that we have there. Let's see. Assessment is the same as test. Yes, I just mentioned that. It must be done on paper. What else do we have here? We have to assess one skill at a time. Pierre just said that. Assessments should be of pencil and paper only. That's also another myth. From Facebook, we have from Beverly, assessments must be hard and make students suffer. Yes, we said that one from Beverly. Thank you. Assessments can only be written, given that we're in what we call the pandemic pedagogy time or remote learning time. That's going to challenge a lot of academics right now and a lot of teachers. That how are you going to assess your students if they're only written? Assessment is an end product, right, rather than a cycle. That comes to the formative and summative discussion. Great feedback there. Keep it coming with any other questions you may have. So Henry Giroux is a critical pedagogist, and he said where he grew up in Canada, learning was a collective activity. But when I got to school and tried to share learning with other students, it was called cheating. How many of you that will resonate with? How we look at students collaborating and what we call everyday skills today is seen as cheating. So let's discuss cheating a little more. On a sunny day, any day, you'll have a cloud of cheating in your classroom. And this may come out because of a variety of pressures from systems, parents, and teachers. I remember doing Common Entrance, which is now SEA, and it was a very stressful time. How many of you, I think some people, I think Trinidad just finished it or is going through it, or just had the results, I can't remember. We had CXC, we had O-levels, now it's CSEC. It was just very, very stressful, always stressful. And I'm one of 6 kids. So imagine my parents going through that cycle 6 times. Another reason that students cheat are students' expectations of themselves. And I must say this also comes from societal pressures, parents, teachers, and the system as well. Students today have higher expectations of themselves than yesterday. It's because of the era that we're in. Another reason is inability to manage time and learning. As students are getting older, it is difficult for them to learn those skills about managing their own time and managing how to learn in the environment that they are. So this comes to a question as to what are we really assessing when we think about these things? Can you tell me what you're assessing in your class right now? I'll give you an example. In my class, and some of my students may be logging on right now, I'm assessing their ability to be concise. They don't think that's what the assessment is asking them, but I'm asking them to use their language use, the expression of language and style of writing, and how clearly can they convey their message through conciseness. What are you measuring in what are you assessing in your class right now? So Mrs. Gocharan says, ability to rephrase in their own words, right? Yep. That's a very hard task for students to do. I don't know, some university students never get it right either. I'm thinking I'm assessing students' ability to problem solve. That's a very key skill. I know one skill that I was discussing yesterday was the ability to be resilient. How do you assess resilience? Keisha says to be analytical and critical thinkers. That's another thing that's those soft areas of assessment that it's very difficult to do. And Alicia says, I'm assessing my students' ability to think critically and independently with specific attention to self-expression using appropriate language, especially for at-risk boys. That's very important when you talk about at-risk kids. Brendan says, allowing them to accept failure and learn from it. That is a very hard thing for us Caribbean people to understand. That is, you're not always successful, and that not being successful doesn't mean you're a failure. That's part of the learning process. Freddie says, assessing the ability to think creatively and innovatively, that's also difficult to assess. Nicholas says, understanding the concepts being taught, the foundational knowledge. That's the key one that most people do. How to apply knowledge, the ability to think for themselves. All right. So those are some of the key ways that we assess. How to construct their own knowledge, that's also important. So let me ask you, how many of you guys know taxonomies? Bloom's taxonomy, I believe, is the most popular one that's out there. There are a number of taxonomies. A lot of people don't know that there are tons of taxonomies that are there. And all of these help you classify your learning activities. Right now I'm using Solo, which is a different level. There's Daniel's Depth. I'm just putting them here so that you have a reference so that you can see that there are others other than Bloom's taxonomy. And this is what we know Bloom's taxonomy to look like. And this is the new, what we call the 21st century Bloom's taxonomy. It has been changed in 2001 by Bloom's daughter, and she elaborated it. So at the bottom, we have remember and understanding. And I'm hoping that most people know the Bloom's taxonomy. If you don't know, I can go through it in detail. And on top, we have create and evaluate and analyze. And it's said that the 4 top areas, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create, a higher order thinking, ways of classifying learning. And at the bottom, remembering and understanding of the foundational knowledge that you use in your class. Moving on, how many of you guys know the learning pyramid by the National Training Laboratories? This might be new to some people. It looks like it's also modeled to look like the Bloom's taxonomy triangle, but it measures and it shows or classifies information differently, where it says that if you only lecture, there's an average rate of retention of that knowledge is 5%. What are you guys noticing as you move from lecture to reading to audiovisual, and as the average retention increases, what are you noticing in the delivery style in that learning pyramid? Student becomes more of a center, yep, and there's an increase, it's more student-centered. It's more engaging. And bad as a beautiful word. A lot of people don't know how to use the word engaging, but it's very key in that word, engagement. The teacher is the facilitator. That's part of it at the top. There's more interaction. Alicia hit the jackpot. There's more interaction between, and I'll elaborate at Alicia, between the student and the teacher. All right. There's more active learning, what we call active learning. Students learn through discovery in the Mala. Thank you for that. So that's what we're looking at. So remember all those things that you listed that you were assessing in your classes. Where on the taxonomy do you think you're assessing on your class? And let's be honest. Where on the taxonomies are you assessing in your class? This is the Bloom's taxonomy. Could you put in the chat windows where you think you're assessing? Some people are doing application. Brad says he's doing application, but he uses information in new situations. Someone says create and evaluate. That's the top of the taxonomy. Kay Blair says right throughout. That's a hard task. That means you have a variety of students and you have a variety of levels. Mrs. Gujranga's, she's doing understanding, which means she's teaching foundational subjects, right? Or foundational knowledge. A lot of people are doing analyze and application. Some people are doing application and understanding. So one thing I would like to say as people are typing in and people are just keep it coming, and you'll, as you see this, you'll see self-professing of what you're doing. As you go up this Bloom's taxonomy, understand includes remembering. Applying includes understanding and remembering. Analysis includes apply, understanding, and remembering. That's what was intended in the design of Bloom's taxonomy. But sometimes that gets away from us as we start to look at how we do our own lesson plans. So wherever you've said that you are assessing right now using Bloom's taxonomy, the bottom areas here where you understand and remember, when you start assessing using understanding and remembering, it is said that those are the areas that are most, there's an increase in cheating occurring. When you do lower order or foundational knowledge, cheating occurs more in the understanding and remembering areas of the Bloom's taxonomy. So let's just think about that for a second. It's not saying that they will cheat if you have to teach or use assessments for understanding and remembrance. It's just that they're more likely to, depending on how you deliver. Likewise, in the learning pyramid, how do you deliver your lessons? Because some people tell me, who lectures? Which means we just speak to the students and they listen. How many of you do demonstrations? How many of you have labs? Some people lecture. Melissa says she does all but lecture. Mrs. Gujarat says she does a mixture of discussion and practice, combination of lecturing, audiovisual, and discussion. Keep it coming. Combination, lecturing chunks followed by active learning activities. Some of you do demonstrations. How many of you do group work, discussions by group? Does anybody allow their students to teach other students? You ask students to teach others. That's good. So where do you think cheating will occur mostly in this learning pyramid? Where would cheating occur mostly in this pyramid? At the top, that's correct. So there's a reason I'm doing this with you guys, so you guys can self-reflect on what your practices are to resolve how you're delivering your content to your students. And therefore that reflection will equate to some kind of adjustment so that you get more learning occurring in your classrooms. So how do we assess with, I have some bad English there. How do we assess with integrity? So we thought this whole workshop is about authentic assessments. And the idea of using authentic assessments, it helps improve the integrity of the assessment so that we get that higher order thinking that we saw in Bloom's and more learning, as we saw in the classification here, where we talk about demonstration, discussion groups, practice by doing, teaching others, that occurs more within your classrooms. So what is an authentic assessment? An authentic assessment is assessment requiring students to use the same competencies they do, but it has to have meaning to them. It has to have meaning to them. And what do we mean by meaning? Is that it's relevant to where they are in society, relevant to what they do on a day-to-day basis, and relevance in terms of something they're going to use in the future. I remember the example that I grew up with was, I was a math whiz, so Pythagoras theorem. I learned Pythagoras theorem just on the board looking at a triangle, but I could not understand where it would be applicable when I left my classroom. The benefit I had was I had a dad who was an engineer who would show me bridges where Pythagoras theorem would help the bridge construction, or he would look at how signs are made, those big billboard signs. He would look at anything, or even in the architecture of buildings, and he showed me where Pythagoras theorem would be used. So that's what we talk about authentic, having meaning to me when I leave the classroom, that I can actually understand what I'm learning in the classroom and its value when I leave the classroom. So authentic assessments, their key are that they perform tasks. They allow the students to perform some form of task. They have to do something. It comes back to those two triangles we showed you. They have to be active. And a task has relevance. It makes meaning. There's one key characteristic for a student is that the task has some measure of choice. You don't have to give them a whole gamut full of, a whole bucket full of choices, but it has to have some choice in there so that they can feel some ownership towards it. What happens when you use those three things is that the designs that you produce are higher order thinking, and you can directly evidence the learning when you do that. So when you're assessing using an authentic task, your Bloom's taxonomy and the critical aspects of critical thinking and higher order thinking begins to go all the way up to the top, where you can see that they're producing extra work, they're doing something by themselves, they're performing a task, right? It has relevance, there's justification, they draw connections among ideas, they use information in new situations. That's a lot of transference and a lot of meaning making from the classroom to the society and where they live and their communities. Likewise, in the learning pyramid, the active learning occurs down there. That's where authenticity relies in demonstration. So when they do things in the classroom, it should reflect what is happening in the homes and communities, etc. Some key steps to doing and already designing an authentic assessment. What we gave you here, what we have designed, is some key steps that you can use on assessments you already have. So we're not talking about designing from scratch, but assessments that you already have in your possession that you're using right now, things that you can transform. So the first thing we will ask you to do is re-identify the learning goals. And we're going to go through these steps, and then we're going to demonstrate it for you later on. Re-identify your learning goals. Just recalibrate your own understanding by restating the aim of the lesson. Sometimes we need to refresh our own understanding of why we're having students do these assessments and what's the value in having this assessment completed. And then secondly, acknowledge your student characteristics. This is something that we fail to do day in and day out. Where are the students from? What is of value to them for this knowledge? Where will they use this information? So the minute they leave their class, they should be thinking, well, where can I talk about with this? And where can I see Pythagoras theorem other than just on the board? So you modify your assessment by giving the students some choice, and you accommodate the immediate environment in the assessment to make meaning to them as you go along. And finally, revise your rubrics. Always include a way of expression. Don't exclude that. Allow students to express what they understand by what you're trying to assess in the way best suited to them. And always assess the process as well as the outcome. What do I mean by that? The activity of doing the assessment is also important as to whether they got it right or wrong. A student can go through a math problem in all of the steps and get the wrong answer. Is the wrong answer more valuable, or is the process more valuable? That's the difference in how we need to look at how we assess. Do we have any questions thus far? Let me see. I will give Laurette the presentations, and you guys can share them, sure. So I gave I gave two examples before we go into some examples from the region. And this one I've used is a marshmallow challenge. And if you ever want to see it and hear people talk about it, look at Tom Wojcik's video on TED Talk about building a tower and building a team. This is a team assignment. I've used this in business management for older kids. I've used it with younger kids just to get them to talk to each other and collaborate and share. And it's a marshmallow challenge. What it does is you get some string, and he will tell you exactly what happens. You get some string, some spaghetti, one marshmallow, and some twine. And the key is by teams in groups of 4 or 5, they have to make the largest tower out of those materials. It enhances your creativity. This exercise has been done with his kids as young as 5 years old to CEOs in Fortune 5 companies. Would you believe that the kids were the more successful than the CEOs in this activity? What did it teach them going forward? It teach them about being creative, looking at different ways of constructing their own structure and testing and proving and testing it, like little experiments they ran through, where CEOs sat down and discussed it first. So Brad said he's done this. A lot of people have done this exercise, and it's not an easy task. You can do this multiple times, and it's not an easy task. All right. Another example that I've used in my classroom is student-generated questions. How many of you would trust your students to generate test questions or assessment questions for your class? It is very rewarding to the students. They have to know the subject to generate the questions. And I also ask them to generate the solutions as well. And I grade that as an activity because it shows a very strong awareness of the knowledge and the features that are going on. So these are two articles. When I share the slides, you will see them that discuss how it's very effective in math learning, very effective, and how it's very productive in terms of developing critical questions and critical thinking, so that students know the kinds of questions to ask when they're learning. It is at this time that I'm going to introduce the regional examples. And in the regional examples, you have peers amongst you that live in your countries within Caribbean, CARICOM at large. And we have a group of teachers who act as designers, instructional designers. And then they're all coupled with a load of different levels of expertise. We have educators from University of Guyana. We have people from Jamaica, University of the West Indies there. We have people from CARICOM Secretariat, as well as myself. We're just going to discuss with you each of these examples. We have 3 examples. One is early childhood, one is primary school, and one is secondary school. We also have people who will give some feedback in terms of special needs, if you need to tweak your lesson to suit your special needs. So with that, I hand it over to Kanika. Kanika, I will take my mic off, and the rest of people who is it Cecile and Joan, I welcome them.
Thanks. Kanika can actually unmute herself.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And I am Kanika Cooper Carrington from the beautiful island of Trinidad and Tobago, well, country, the island Tobago to be exact. This afternoon, I will be giving an example of authentic assessment in early childhood development. So for this example, we'll choose a topic, identifying and learning about colors, right? Recognizing colors and identifying them is an important part of child's development, right? So they will be able to explore and experiment with colors using various methods, including paper, crayons, Play-Doh, and paint.
Just let me know when you need to progress.
Okay.
Go ahead. Yep.
Right, because this age group is more like children, 3.5 to 5 year old, right? In assessing them, we don't want it to be too harsh, too rigid. We want the children to have fun, to be their natural self, so that we may be able to get the true representation of what they have been learning, right? So next slide, please. So for this assessment, we'll choose show and tell. It's a known game, right? The students will bring their favorite object to class. Together, the color of each object will be presented and discussed. So the object can be a fruit, a toy, a bowl, anything that they can bring to school. In assessing them, the child would show their object to the class. They would state the color of the object, tell why it is their favorite object. They would also be asked to state their favorite color. If their favorite color is different from the color of the object that they have brought, they will be asked to look around the room and locate or point out something that is in their favorite color. Another example could be the I Spy game. This game could be played using objects within the learning environment. If the age group is 3.5 to 4, and they are a little bit on the younger side, we can put objects strategically in different points in the classroom to make it easier for them, right? Each child would get the chance to spy and also locate spied objects, right? And as I said before, depending on the age of the child, you may want to narrow it down. For example, I spy with my little eyes a blue book by a red table. In the corner, you point at the corner. A bigger child, you may just see a blue book by the red table, right? And we have here after the rubric. Now, many of us may have seen a rubric or not, right? The rubric here defines the expectation of the child. So yes, they are playing a game, but it's an assessment. So the rubric should tie in with your objectives. The rubric will also use as a scoring instrument to determine the degree to which the learning standards have been met by the teacher. Right, this is the end of my presentation.
So now we are and Cecile to comment and to give some feedback.
Oh, sorry. Good afternoon. I'm so sorry. Okay, Kanika shared with you what we do at the early childhood level when it comes to authentic assessment. And I'm just going to ask her to expand on why she feels that these are authentic assessment. Kanika?
But it is authentic because it's realistic. It requires the child to do, right? The child will be applying what they have learned in this situation, right? Authentic assessment asks students to actively participate in the situation that require them to apply the principles they have learned. It's not about recalling, it's more about performing. And this actually motivates students to engage themselves.
Thank you. And what we also need to remember at the early childhood level as well is that, you know, it applies to the various, it has to be age appropriate. So depending on the age, as Kanika had said, if the younger ones, you would start with like the primary colors, but as they get older, you could then look at doing the mixed colors, but ensure that it is relating back to their environment. I think we could open up for any questions. Anybody has any questions for us?
How would you change this for special needs group?
Well, one of the things that we would do is, first we'll need to know the type of needs, but because it is color, we would then address it accordingly to the special needs, to the child. So rather than giving the child 2 or 3 colors, we may give the child 1 color, and then we would prompt the child. First, we'll tell the child what the color is, and then we'll give them the time in order to work on that color. Kanika, would you like to expand on what I just said?
Well, that goes back to the example of the I Spy. Based on the disability that the child has, you may switch up the activity. So you may have to break it down totally so a child in that ability, for that child's ability.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm gonna bring. Go ahead, Leroy. Leroy, you were going to make a comment, and I'm bringing in Joan. Joan, you should be able to unmute your mic now.
Okay, good. Good afternoon, colleagues. Yes, special needs children. My colleague mentioned that we're looking at what we're doing should be age appropriate. There's also looking at developmentally appropriate. So we have 2 things to look at. What is expected for the given age? And so maybe, of course, they're all going to be developing color awareness, but we may have, based on how we see a child responding, we may have different levels of expectations for some of our special needs learners. Not everybody might get the red, blue, yellow, green at the same time. So we're monitoring carefully and looking at how they're able to identify the colors, classify them into groups and so on. You're going to be observing that child who is putting the red and blue and everything and just mixing up everything, because they're not going to, everyone is not going to get it at the same time. Or form of assessment is really what we see, what we manage children at their level of functioning, rather than to give them the activities, go sit someplace. Well, with young kids, you can't sit anywhere. You can't sit at the desk. You have to sit with them and assist that child or those children who are not getting it right yet, but to help them, give them more assistance. And also, pyramid, where if we are engaging students to work with each other, then you're going to get someplace a little faster, because their peers, if you pair them according to sometimes flexible pairing, sometimes you have them in their homogeneous grouping. So all those who are able to manage, those who are much more advanced at learning colors and shapes and all of that, and identifying favorite colors. There are others who can do something at a much higher level, still involving colors. And those who are going on just the way we expect them to be going along. And then there are those who are somewhat behind. So we have different levels of supervision and interaction and what we do with the children based on what we know about where they are. And so, and even when we get to the show and tell, and they bring in their objects and so on, this is where we get the parents involved now, because we're going to say to all the parents, but especially the parents of our children who are developmentally delayed, that we want you to be practicing this as you work with them in the home. What color is your dress? What color is your shoes? You help them, you overstimulate them with the information. So, and at school, you have to do the same thing too. So you might have to put that child in the middle of something that everything that is there is red. So it's just to identify red. And then you bring in another color so that there's a differentiation between red and blue. So it's all about knowing your students' needs and ensuring.
Yeah, I wanted to just add, I don't know if... Hello?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to add to what Joan was saying, in that it's about knowing your student. And the thing here is, with special education, we have to pay special attention to the individual learning needs and map it to your individual lesson outcomes. So it's not an easy thing to say, okay, this is the best thing. We obviously know that we have to differentiate the process and differentiate the content. I think the key thing here is that a one size fits all will not be a good application for special education. And in that, it was mentioned over and over again, the whole idea of doing. I mean, even allowing them to make mistakes and learn from the mistakes. Okay, let's try this again. Let's try this. Okay, what happens when you do this? So the child now is, I'm getting confidence that, hey, it's okay if I make an error, and that I can learn from my mistakes. Okay, let me try something new. So I think in special education, we have to be very careful in terms of trying to have that one size fits all mentality. We have to definitely do away with that. And so I want to thank Joan and Kanika for clarifying that. So that's what I wanted to add.
I do have a question with relation to that. For this level, what came to mind as Joan and Kanika spoke was the idea of teacher attitude. It seems to me, from all the dimensions that they describe, it means that if you learn using this authentic assessment approach, the attitude of the teacher needs to change in terms of what the expectation is at the end. Because I think Camille spoke to it in the sense that of saying that it requires a little bit of reflection in terms of what it is, and the expectation should not be that the child is wrong or right. And this question kind of is for Kanika or Joan, in terms of thinking about how do you manage a classroom with this sort of authentic assessment approach, particularly if you're thinking of some sort of special needs.
Yeah.
Management of or classrooms with mixed ability learners. For teachers who have mastered this through differentiation and so on, they find that it's so much easier to manage the children because they help to manage themselves. So for example, I try not to work with more than 3 groups in a class. Somehow, if you have 3 or 4 groups, so maximum 3 I like. So you have, as I mentioned before, your advanced group, and you have your group that's going as expected, and your group that's somewhat delayed. And let's say we're in a classroom, early childhood classroom, really should not have more than 15 children in there. So if that is so, you might find that you have 3 or 4 at one end and so on, depending on the nature, on the children you have. So once they learn, even little kids, I've been in classrooms, I'll never forget my experience in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, where the teacher, this was a grade 1 class, and so they were just turning 6. And she explained to them, the whole class, what the objective of the lesson was. She didn't say objective, but she told them what we're gonna learn, and the children repeated it and so on. And then when she wrote it on a little board, because she had a little board that she used only for objective, and when she delivered the lesson, the most remarkable thing that I found was that the children helped her to evaluate that lesson. Got a little bit funny at times, because not funny, that's not the word I'm looking for, but when she asked them to evaluate the lesson, they were able to say who they think got it, what they learned, and then some of them were saying, that one don't get it, miss. He don't learn. He don't learn the silent T rule yet. This was closer towards the end of grade 1. He did not learn it. And she'd say, but I'm going through that tomorrow again. He will have an opportunity to do that. But the way in which those little grade 1 children managed themselves was exceptional, because after she delivered, they were in their groups. She did mixed stability groups for them so that they were able to help themselves. And there's a leader for the group. There's a leader for the group. And so she also had an indication as to which group she was going to sit with today. And so the children spending a little bit more attention today, a bit more attention today. So she sat with them, and she ensured, because she had more of her children who were on the slower side, they were delayed, peers, she was there to drive the activity, to assist her assistants. The only trouble that she had in there was her own son, because then he thought he was a deputy teacher. And so he was there giving instructions all over the place. But the thing is that those groups and the teachers that I find who have managed differentiation, they say it's a godsend to them when it comes to managing children and their behaviors, because they're engaged, they're doing, and you see when the children are doing at the high school level, you walk into classes where the children are doing the technical vocational areas. Those teachers don't have any challenges with those children. Language or control, because when they're in the tech voc areas, they're constantly doing, relating to the objectives, the theory and the practice, and they're learning the vocabulary of the skill. Totally different. So I find the management, once you have mastered how to group for instruction and so on, and you're able to maneuver yourself around the groups, and you have your children helping each other and so on.
Well, I wanted to ask.
Vincent and the Grenadine, and the teacher.
Go ahead.
Oh, I think I'm getting some delayed. Yeah.
Oh, you're not hearing me very well.
Go ahead. There was a question.
Yeah, I wanted to ask in terms of when do we suspend our, I think it is hinted in the discussion, you know, where we know the student is doing something wrong, but how do we do that? how do we as educators guide the students? And I saw the comment from Charmaine mentioning the whole idea of discovery. How do we do that as teachers? Because sometimes we can say wrong or right. How it's done is an important part, and I think that that other aspect is very important in building the child's confidence in trying again, or exploring different ways, especially when you're dealing with special education students.
But I just want to add in there, this is Camille speaking. There's a whole theory behind failure-based learning, which I knew growing up in Trinidad. You weren't allowed to fail. Failing was seen as a bad thing. The learning process requires you to fail, and to fail continuously in order to learn. That's how the brain works. The brain does not just only learn the right thing. It has to learn the wrong thing so that you become knowledgeable. The more things you learn wrongly, the more expansive your brain and more powerful your intellect becomes. So what Leroy is intimating is that, yes, we need to be mindful of how we say things are wrong, but also allow them to correct themselves and choose different parts in their knowledge as we go forward. I'm hoping Joan, because that's her expertise in special needs, can guide us to how that is done if her audio is working a little bit better.
Could you please repeat what you want me to do? Because I just switched from the Wi-Fi to my phone connection. So I didn't hear part of it because I'm using my phone Wi-Fi hotspot to see if it's better. Is it actually better?
Yes, it sounds a lot better. Thank you. So what we're just saying is that how you correct, Leroy intimated about how you correct students and how you encourage them to keep going through the process even though they're wrong, and the idea of how you do that with special needs. That's an important cue, especially for this age group. Do you have any guidance to share with the colleagues on that?
Okay. It is important that we do as much as possible practice positive reinforcement. Positive in highlighting effort is one of the ways that we do that, because yes, you didn't get red, you called blue red. But you've been doing, and I like your effort, I like how you're trying, and you bring in as much as is possible. If we look at the learning pyramid and we look at how practice by doing and teaching others, I watched a teacher, he sat with his children, he sat on the floor with them. And yes, some of them were not getting it right, but he was praising effort. He was allowing them to make the mistakes, because when you make your mistakes, that's how you learn. And sometimes the little kids would recognize and say, oops, no, not red, not red. And of course, they're learning to differentiate. So you have to accept errors as part of it and not be frustrated because you saw that a special needs child was not getting all the colors. And remember earlier, I said about your expectations that they're going to be learning these 4 colors and everybody's going to be doing activities around these 4 colors. For our kids, you might have to say, no, my focus is on 2 colors. My focus is on getting this 1 color. So my objectives is going to be, they will be a little bit different depending on the needs of the child. So errors are encouraged because that's how you learn. And sometimes when we say, give me a non-example, yes? So which one of these is not red? Yes, so you have 4 red ones and 1 blue one. Which one of these is not red? So you want a non-example too, to help the brain to develop, because it's not just always seeing the things presented in the same way all the time. Pick out the red one, group all the red ones. Which one is really not red? So there are different ways in which, but the main thing though is to positive reinforcement of not just actual achievement, but the effort that you put in to get that achievement done, to get the activity done rather.
Great, this is perfect. Do we have any, and Go
I
ahead.
noticed another question being posed. It's how to manage the over-exuberance and avoid chaos in the environment.
And that's in teacher education, though. That's that's a different discussion, though. And that's where we work on our own resilience as a teacher. So we want to move on to the primary school now, and this was a great conversation to start us off. So we thank Kanika, and that there's the all hands on deck discussion there.
May I say one thing quickly in response to that? How you manage that chaos? Practice by doing. A lot of that, once the children are engaged, they don't have time for chaos and confusion.
That's a very key point, because once they're learning, it looks chaotic to you, but to them, they're having fun. They're moving through the process.
Oh, yes.
All right, so now we welcome, and thank you, Joan. Thank you, Kanika. Thank you, Cecile, Leroy, Kathy, Charmaine. Thank you. So we're moving on to primary school, and here we have Amina. Amina will introduce herself, and Laurette will help Amina unpack what she has designed. Go ahead, Amina.
Thank you, Dr. Dixon-Dean. So I am Amina. I am actually on Trinidad. So in this example, the students are being asked to identify and describe emblems of their choice. And we're looking in terms of national emblems, and they are being asked to produce artifacts that express their interpretations of these emblems. Now, this is an example that you see in front of you here. These are the instructions that we would be sharing to the students. Of course, you will word the instructions according to the ability of the class. I'll just go through the instructions and then break it down for you task by task. So the instructions are, you look around your environment at home or in your locality for one of the national emblems. If there is one, then if there isn't one, that should be if there isn't one, you'll find something that reminds you of the emblems. Then in at least 3 sentences, either identify the emblem and describe its details, or identify an item that reminds you of an emblem and describe why it makes you think about that emblem. And then the final task is to reproduce the emblem in a way that is meaningful to you being the child. Now, I'm breaking down the tasks step by step for you now. In the first task, identifying an emblem in the environment. They have the option that it could be something within their home environment, within their house, in their yard, or it could be something that is within their village or even the wider community. Right? Now, if there is no emblem around, they cannot identify one. What they have the option to do is to select something from the environment that reminds them of an emblem. So here we are giving them options. We are giving them choices. All right, now that will be the first task if you look back at the instructions there, where they would be able to recognize or to identify the emblem. In the second task, they are to describe the emblem which they have identified. They are to say where it was found and provide a description of it. If they identify something that reminds them of an emblem, they are to explain why it reminds them of this emblem. So then they will make connections while at the same time describing. And in the final task, the third task here will afford the students the opportunities for self-expression as they create the artifact that will represent their interpretation of the emblem and what it actually means to them. So here we are going to try to bring out their own feelings and their own interpretations and expressions. For example, they can write a poem on the scarlet ibis. Now I'm taking examples from Trinidad. All right, so that is one example. They can write a poem on the scarlet ibis, or they can create a collage that depicts the meaning of the pledge. Or another example is they can sing the anthem or even play the anthem on an instrument. These are choices that they have. It is all up to them and their choices, what they desire to do, what is going to be meaningful to them. Dr. Dean, can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. All right, now, so you would see that these tasks are all geared towards achieving these objectives. They have to recognize the national emblems. They will begin to develop dispositions of national pride, and they will creatively portray an understanding of the national emblems. These objectives are all being covered within those tasks that were outlined previously. Okay, next slide, please. No, I did not mention the level before. We were aware that it was primary. As soon as I started talking about emblems, we would have known that it was social studies. And then our age group, based on what they are expected to do, we are looking at around 7 or 8 years of age. All right, then we'll go to the rubric. Next slide, thank you. So if you observe the criteria column, where we have emblem recognition, emblem description, and emblem portrayal, you would note that they match the tasks that the students are to complete. Okay, so we must ensure that the rubrics match what the students have to complete, which of course the tasks would be geared towards achieving the objectives. All right, so we can discuss this now. Any questions?
Thanks for that, Amina. Really appreciate it. And one of the things, hi everybody, I am Dr. Lord Bristol, Program Manager here at CARICOM Secretariat. Also a trained primary school teacher, so it's always good to get back into these conversations after years of being out of the classroom. Amina, one of the things that you emphasized a lot in your assessment was the question of choice, the importance of giving the student a choice. Why is choice so important to one, learning, and why is choice so important as an aspect of authentic assessment?
Right. So choice is actually what would bring out the creativity in the students. And in a case like this, where we're looking at, yes, recognition of the emblems, but then what you really want to achieve here is that sense of patriotism in our students, right, and our children. And we want creative citizens. We want citizens who can give back to society. So when we want something to be authentic for the children, it has to be coming from within them. And even for an adult, if you give an adult a choice, he or she would probably perform better at choosing. If it's a task, they would perform better at a task that he or she had that choice with, right? And it is the same thing for children. You give them the choices and they will choose something and they will run with it, and there is where they will give of their best, and that is where the authenticity comes out from. Now, I could expand a little bit more on being specific about this topic with our children. What we would want that they start to sort of fuel their creativity. And with the task that they have here within this particular assessment, it is coming from their own environment. It is things that they are familiar with, right? So therefore, it is going to encourage that fueling of their creativity. They can express their feelings, and then with all of that, be able to show their unique abilities. And that is where they will make meaning. And that is where, after this particular assessment or this learning, then they will be able to transfer that spark of creativity to something else. And as they grow up, they would be able to apply that creativity into anything that they have to accomplish, any challenges that they have to face, right? And I am even thinking in terms of where you have, because it is emblems, if you think of emblems to a country, and an emblem to a country is like branding to a company or to some sort of gear or apparel. And that is what we want children to see. We want them to be able to make the connection. Okay, yes, I want to develop the citizenship and the patriotism in you, but at the same time, we're trying to even make it a greater achievement here, right? So that you're creating what will in fact be entrepreneurs of the future with this creativity. And we know that in the Caribbean, we are extremely creative. So we actually, even though we are so creative, there is no limit for us. And this, in addition, this particular assessment, the authenticity of it will, the main intention is to try to start developing in them the loyalty. And why do we need loyal citizens? We need loyal citizens so that they could contribute back to our society, so that we will have support, for example, in terms of events, whether it's national events, international events, we have the support. We have caring citizens who consider our environment, who consider people who are less fortunate, because recently with the pandemic, we have been seeing that many people were placed in a position where they needed help. So although this is a simple social studies assessment, it has long-reaching effects. And if it is delivered to the children and then they are assessed in this authentic manner, it is going to help to produce and to bring out these aspects in them. I hope I answered your question.
That's good, thanks. And you raised some very important points. You know, quite often in the Caribbean, we talk about students are not creative enough. The students are not applying critical thinking to their learning. And what you've actually raised on the whole matter of choice is that you've raised the fact that if we want to see creativity, we want to see innovation, and we want to see entrepreneurialism in our students, we have to deliberately design our teaching and learning experiences to pull those kinds of dispositions out of the students, and more so design our encounters with our students in such a way that those dispositions are nurtured over time. Yeah, not just for students, but for learners. So I want to. There's something very curious about the assessment. In that, quite often, you know, it's hard for us as teachers. Even when we think about choice, the choice is often the same. But you've done something a little bit different in the choice. You've said to the student, look, if you do not have an emblem in your environment, identify something that reminds you of the emblem. It's in the minds of many of us, that's almost distant from what the task is. So help connect for all of us. How is it relevant to what? How does that? Think about something that reminds you of the emblem, and then say how and why. And on top of that, you have the choice of how you're going to complete the assignment. How is that connected very closely to the objectives for the lesson? Because for many of us, that appears to be distant.
Right. So, okay, for example, let's say somewhere around the house, there is a flag. It isn't our Trinidad and Tobago flag. It isn't a flag from one of our countries. But there is, say, a T-shirt with another flag on it. They can, and with a flag from probably a different country with a name, they can now take that, although it seems so far-fetched, and they can say, well, this reminds me of our flag because it is actually a flag of another country. And then from that, they start classifying, and they see things not just isolated. They will be able to make connections, and then I mean, it will also encourage them to think beyond just looking for something that might obviously relate to one of the emblems, because the flag that they see there may not have the same colors as their country's flag, but they are making that relationship, right? So that is actually helping them to think outside the box per se.
Right. So thinking outside the box again, another habit of learning, so that we ensure that the students are being taught not content, but what is being emphasized is competency, so that they can go on to learn anything in any form later on. While my last question before I open it up to my colleagues on the team, in the rubric you talk about outstanding. So there is a question that can occur in terms of how do you measure outstanding?
Yes. So in terms of outstanding, it has to be based on the student's abilities, right? Now, and for our listeners, for teachers I'm addressing, we would know the level of children that we have in our class. There are some classes who would have children who would excel beyond, and then there will be classes who which the composition would not be level across the board. So in terms of outstanding, you would want a description that covers the meanings of the anthem, or sorry, not the anthem, the meanings of the emblem, and a physical description of it as well. And in there, you would want to have where the child expresses that aspect of how does this remind me, or why does this remind me of a particular emblem. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think I will open it up to our colleagues on the team now to ask any questions or emphasize any points.
Okay.
And of course, our participants can actually pose their questions in the chat for us to respond to if they need to. So colleagues?
Yes. I think Shirley Miller had a question. She had her hand up. Shirley, would you like to type your question in and we'll read it?
There are also two questions from the chat, Camille.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Charmaine had a question. How is creativity measured, and how do you measure the softer skills?
Creativity is a very difficult thing to measure, as well as the softer skills. And they are very subjective ways of measurement, and they become very individualistic in when you start measuring them going forward. I don't know what Amina has to say, but knowing her age group within the classroom, and you have to basically pool your students' abilities and understand where your students' abilities are and create your own measurement from there. And that's the correct way of measuring creativity, by the way. It's not based on what you determine creativity, but you're putting the students amongst themselves.
Right. Yes.
So
if I could just add, Camille,
go ahead.
In terms of creativity, you have to look for what is unique in what the child is doing. Look for something unique. However, at the same time, you have to be lenient, because you will not expect in a class of 25 that every single child will have something that is different, but they can take an idea and they could add to it. So we have to look for that. And even if they don't add to it, we can encourage the child by maybe asking, well, you know, could you probably, what would it look like if you did so and so? And pose some questions to the child and see what happens. And that is where we will probably be able to bring out the creativity more, and then be able to assess it fairly.
But is it that we are trying to assess creativity, or we want to create the space for creativity to emerge? I think what we assess as teachers is this particular objective. Yeah. So we assess the objective, but how the student approach completing and realizing the objective is a space for creativity that we allow to emerge.
Right. And just to dovetail with what Laurette has mentioned, and Leroy speaking here, is that the whole idea of allowing the students to evaluate, I think sometimes we as educators have to suspend judgment and allow the students to go through that metacognition in sense of seeing how well they would have contributed towards that transformation that needs to take place beyond the rubric. You know, sometimes there is the tendency for us to really, as educators, think that we have, I know we're doing authentic assessment, but how do you really award a student who's gone beyond, way beyond what you're looking at the emblems, and they've done something so superb that it's leading towards social justice issues, is leading towards and how do you do that? How do you kind of encourage that? I mean, do you judge, can you really judge that from a teacher standpoint, or do you encourage the students to have that level of metacognition that they can see, that I'm doing this, and that gives them a greater sense of self-regulation and pushing forward even beyond the classroom?
Yeah, I see that we're talking about sometimes we need to reconstruct the rubric. And I think one of the most difficult tasks for us as teachers, I certainly remember when I was practicing, is that it took me hours to really work out a rubric in terms of, is this rubric measuring the objectives of the lesson? And I think that quite often it's why teachers kind of shy away from sitting and investing the time in developing a rubric. But when they take the time, I think, in developing the rubric, it allows them to visualize the possibilities for action as learners in some more critical ways. So I certainly think that when we think about authentic assessment, oftentimes we think about how are students going to apply this to learning. I'm remembering Camille's experience of learning Pythagoras theorem, and I'll certainly tell you that I only understood Pythagoras theorem as an adult in my master's program, where my faculty at the time was actually explaining Pythagoras theorem by explaining the corners in the room, you know, and that's when it clicked. You know, and I thought, well, you know, if my teacher had done that for me as a child, maybe I might have fallen in love with math, because at the time I saw no real application for what I was learning in math. So I switched my brain off. So the whole question of applying back to the real life circumstances is absolutely critical for us to think about when we think about learning. Any of our other colleagues want to make any more other comments?
I would give you a comment about cheating. So I was, as a child, and this is Camille, I was accused of cheating many times, because what I would do in my assignments is I would look it up in the numerous books my parents had, and then copy it, as we say in Trinidad, tutbagay, everything, sign my name, and say, look, where did you find this? In a book. I answered the question. And I was very proud of myself, because my father taught me how to research. So I was very, very proud. And numerous times I would be told, you're cheating. You are cheating. You did not answer these on your own. And I go like, yes, I did. I researched it in a book. The question was there with the answer, and I just wrote it down. How do you address that?
Yeah.
That's a hard one, I think. I think the importance here is conversation, Camille. Because I think there are two challenges here. One is a question of, does the student understand what cheating is in a real essence? So you certainly need a conversation with the student to understand the concept of cheating and why cheating is wrong from a values position. And I think the other question that is emerging is the question of confidence. Yeah, because if we dig into why a potential student may cheat, quite often that practice of cheating is tied to questions around confidence. We can identify other values that might be associated, but we want to give the student the benefit of the doubt. And therefore, we want, as teachers, I would argue, to think about the ways in which we engage with our learners so that we do the moral and the value-based teaching, but we also work to support and strengthen their sense of confidence. Yeah, so that they are not afraid to fail. We talked about that in the first session, that one of the reasons people cheat is that I don't want anybody to know that I fail and I don't know the answer. So we want to make it safe to fail. And that's sometimes very difficult for our teachers and our students in a competitive classroom environment where the only thing that is valued is the person who gets ahead first. So we want to begin as teachers to build confidence in our students and allow the classrooms to become safe environments to learn through failure. Yeah, and the more I can learn through my failure and see my failure as a learning opportunity, my confidence grows, and I know it doesn't mean that I'm less than. It means that there's something that I was missing. I need to fix that, make adjustments, make accommodations, and keep going. And that's how you begin to build resiliency. We talk about resiliency all the time as well within our learners. But how does a student learn to be resilient unless they learn to fall, unless they learn to fail? I mean, a child will never walk if they don't fall. They will never run if they don't trip as they begin to walk. So you see, it's important that we create safe spaces for our students to not be as successful as they need to be, so that they can learn from that. And I always think about our teachers as well, because sometimes in order for our teachers to learn those habits and learn those dispositions to create those kinds of safe environments in their classrooms, it's important for us as educational leaders to also support our teachers in making mistakes, learning from their mistakes, and moving on. So teachers also need to be modeling the behavior so that their students could see that. Teachers need to be engaging with experimentation. And it's okay to say to the students, listen, I've never done this before, but let's see where we will go with this. And then at the end, you can evaluate with the students and say, well, maybe and they sometimes could tell you, miss, maybe if you do X differently or Y differently, it might work better this way. So you have to co-create those spaces of safety in the classroom for your learners, I think. It's important for us to, let's think a little bit about the special ed implication, Amina. And we have Joan, who is here with us as our special ed expert. Okay. What are the, Joan?
Yes, I want to go back a little bit though to our colleague and what she thought was cheating back then. In our curriculum in Jamaica, for example, from grade 1, our children are researching. It's built into the curriculum. And what is built into it now, which we didn't have back then, because all we had encyclopedia to go and leaf through and all of that. They have the wide world, www, the network. So they have the internet. So now they're taught from grade 1 what is the difference between what is their own work and how to interpret and use somebody else's work, and why when you say exactly what they say and present it as your own words, then that is not acceptable. From grade 1, it's in the curriculum. So they're exposed to, and they use the internet, because that's where they're gonna find a lot of information. They're hardly leafing through books anymore. So it's a matter of letting them know the difference between what is really your own work and how can I refer to somebody else's work and make it mine by using some of their thoughts and so on. Back then we didn't have that, but it's built into the curriculum now. So that should help. To go back to the whole matter of special needs, when you're doing these activities at the primary level again, and I'm really promoting differentiation and how we make adaptations, right? So we're looking at possibly not having the same quantity, the amount of things that we expect for our children to be completing. Not every lesson must conclude with answering 10 questions. Yes, whether it's math or language arts or so on, not every lesson must end up with the traditional way of how we think you have acquired information. Our colleague presented an excellent lesson where the children may use a poem, some may be coloring. Now, some of our special needs children who might not be able to read at the lower primary yet, let's say this is a grade 2, and they are not able to read everything that's related to the activity. And again, here we are talking about, flags, national emblems, and so on. The different types of activities. So my special needs child might be able to just match the name up to the coat of arms, that it is the coat of arms, this is the flag, and so on. So we're giving them what we call respectful tasks. Now, not because everybody is doing highfalutin work about the emblems of Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, Dominica, wherever. I can do something too. And in doing so, I'm going to demonstrate that I understand. If I'm coloring my flag, I should know what each color in that flag means. And I might even make up a little song about those colors and what it means to us, to me, and what it means to Trinidad and Tobago, right? So all the tasks that are being presented, I can break it down. This is where we're going to have to depend now on how can we take this down to the lowest common denominator then, so that we're doing task analysis. How will I get my child to put the words of the poem, put it to poem, the symbols and what they mean, right? How do I get them to color and match names? How do I get them? I might have a special needs child who is an excellent artist. So how do I get that artist to be the person in each of the groups helping to illustrate the coat of arms, helping to illustrate the flag, and so on? How can we make a video together that will show what I have learned? And our Caribbean children, I find, are such dramatic. We are dramatic people. We are. And once you tell a kid, no, this child, you read a story to the whole class. Let's say you read something about how we came up with the meaning of our flag, and you ask the children to retell that story. Isn't retelling saying to you that I have mastered, I gained, I understood when I was able to retell that story, kept all the details, did the summary, and so on? Even though I'm a non-reader, I'm not yet reading, but I can tell you back everything I have learned today. So there are ways and means that you will pull in the special child in a very positive way, and the child has good self-image. We can vary the amount of time. So we talk about the quantity. We can vary the time. We can vary the level of support that we give those children in the various groups. We can talk about adapting the way we instruct the learner, because then I might take a little group here and they're working on aspects of that whole thing of understanding. What does it mean to me to be a Trinbagonian? What does it mean to me? And so someone could be the writer who is writing, who's expressing what is happening, but everybody is contributing, everybody is learning. And the way in which I demonstrate how I learned, what I learned, is not necessarily going to be in writing 10 sentences about it, but it might very well be in the way I dramatize something about what I have learned, how I retell the story of our beautiful island, how do I illustrate it, and so on. And to celebrate everybody's contribution in that group, no matter how small it is. All right. So we just difficulty level, what we expect as the output, how we have them participating. Alternative goals may have to be considered for some of our children. So I might not want all of them to learn the flag, the coat of arms, this and that, but I want 2 from you or 1 from you. And if I get that, I'm good to go today. And maybe a substitute curriculum, at times we might have to think about that in order. So yes, those topics are taught at lower grades too. How was it handled there, and how do we add on? Because all of us add value every time we receive children coming from another grade. All right, thanks.
Thank you. I want to, Leroy speaking here, I want to perhaps kind of be disruptive here in giving you a scenario where the students were given something to solve, and none of them could work it out individually. And so the students came together and they discussed it, and they decided that, okay, this is what this, and they figured it out together. They worked collaboratively and solved it, and all of them presented the same answer to the teacher. Now, my question is the students were all given 0 for that. And I think this culture of collaboration, as we've seen in the pyramid, is something that we've not perhaps encouraged. And I think it's a total mindset. And sometimes when students work in group, and I think that Brendan is leading to that, because right now, many of us in our real world situations, we crowdsource solutions. And it's not just about the individual agenda, it's about how you work in groups and demonstrating. So one student would have demonstrated and showed, okay, this is how I resolved it. And then they say, okay, and they figured it out together. So how do we create that greater value for group discussions and valuing from an assessment standpoint? Because here it is okay that you evaluate individually, but how do we value that? Because as Rosen has indicated, the whole idea of culture of collaboration is something difficult. And even so in the Caribbean, it is extremely difficult for us to work together, and actually the group moves forward as that thinking. So I don't know, it's a question kind of mixing it up.
Yeah, there are ways that you can assess individually in a group. That's one thing that you should know. And you do know that if you're learning something that's difficult, and based on the different variety of levels of assessment needs and requirements, it is always advisable that you put it to a group first, because it boosts students' confidence levels. They begin to teach each other and grow together in that knowledge part and that knowledge learning process. Once they've done that, they will feel confident in attempting those kinds of questions individually, where they can then also be assessed again individually for their understanding. That's something that we as educators fail to understand. That group learning is not negating the individual understanding.
Yeah.
It is helping it and it's growing it. Because those are the skills we need when we leave. You need to work in a group anyway. So understanding how to analyze that information and, as I say, parse it between good, right, and indifferent, and why is good, right, and indifferent as a group measure, and then individually deciding which one would be the better. Because even if I do the work in the group, I could still step out and say, you know what? The group did this, but I think differently and I make a different choice. It still helps me as a learner going through that process and understanding as an educator what those kinds of activities do to the learning process is key.
Yeah. Go ahead, Catherine. Go ahead.
Yeah, I posted it in the chat, but I think it's important as much. I think Leroy raised two very different points. If the assignment is given and from the beginning it is a collaborative effort, there's always value in collaborative work, in allowing students to work together and come up with an idea, develop an idea and come up with a solution. There's always value with that. And in group work, all the time, there's always that idea of what you have in the bottom there, which is teach others, because we learn from each other as we speak and as we try to move through the problem. However, in the example Leroy gave, this is Kathy, by the way, in the example Leroy gave, the other issue that came to my mind is that perhaps there's something wrong with the assessment. If all the kids could not solve it individually, it may mean that the assessments may have some flaws. It may be that the assessment is beyond the level of the students or one individual student to work out. I think it's a time for the teacher to reflect on that assessment and not necessarily punish the students because they came together, they thought about it, and they came up with a solution. I think it really reflects on the assessment or on how the teacher thinks that about that sort of thing. So it has two parts. That idea of collaboration, which is excellent, that students work together, but also the teacher themselves being that sort of reflective practitioner and thinking about the work and what it is they require of the students, and also kind of knowing your students' abilities as a teacher.
I wanted to add to Laurette and Camille that in group work, we also have to be mindful too that if we are putting these children to work and we want to assess, we can get some of the softer skills that were alluded to earlier in the conversation as they learn how to work together, because as Camille said, we're also preparing them for life and for community and everything else. So it's important too that we see how they work together. But again, as was emphasized, we get an opportunity to also look at the individual contribution to the whole. And that's an important element of for them and for the teacher. So the teacher, as was mentioned by my colleague earlier, must be also reflective and alert to what's happening. But please permit me also to step back a little bit to that to what was opened up by Camille when she said she copied something and signed on. And I noticed that a lot of us indicated that we started to talk about plagiarism and all of that. And yes, we want students to recognize that they must not use other people's work without acknowledging, because we introduced the whole concept of teaching. But it's something that we have to teach them, and it's something that we have to teach ourselves to as teachers. So if a student in their zealousness to get their work and to do right and to do well, bring that piece of work, one, we reward them for bringing the work, but then we have to have that other level of conversation to the entire class about how we use that work. We talked earlier about paraphrasing and the like. So these are all things that we are teaching and facilitating and discussing as our students come forward to us, because we don't want to break their spirit and to break the whole learning. And I think somebody mentioned it in the chat that we have to be tactful, yes, but we also have to do all that we want to do in the correct way as we groom and prepare our children for, you know, all the other things that this classroom environment prepares them for. Thank you.
Agreed. Camille, I think we had one last question that was coming through in terms of what would this assessment look like in an online environment? Amina, do you want to quickly tell us what you think it would look like in an online environment before we hand back over to Camille to go to the next case?
All right, so in terms of an online environment, I would think in terms of, first of all, the engagement between the teacher and the students. So we would probably have to have the students engage via one of the online platforms that is suitable for them, easy for them, nothing too challenging. For example, the one that we are using here now, Zoom, in order to have the conversations first so that we can have clarity for the students. And then we will have to consider submission of these assessments, because in a physical classroom, it would be easy for them to bring something into the classroom, or it would be easy for them to demonstrate something in front of the classroom. But now that we don't have that option, everything will have to be transferred digitally. So it could, again, it will be options for the students, and options based on what they have available, what technology they have available to them. So they can record something, whether it be a video recording, whether it be an audio recording, whether they choose to put something on paper and take a photo of it, or whether they can They are at a level where they can use simple drawing tools, right? And be able to submit digital work in that manner. So these are the ideas I have right now in terms of being able to transfer it to the online platforms.
Thanks for that, Amina. I think we can ask our colleagues who are also in the virtual room with us that they can also put into the chat any ideas they have about transforming this particular assessment into in an online environment. I think just because we want to be sure that we get through everything, I would now say thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you very much, Amina, and I'll hand over to Camille to go on to the next level.
Okay, so that was very insightful conversation. I hope you guys are feeling very, excited about this. And there is Candice ready to go. So, Candice, I hand over to you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dean. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Candice. I'm from Jamaica, and I'm actually a teacher at Bel Air High School. Now, I have two things to share with you, one social studies and one mathematics, but I'm going to start with social studies. Now, the problem is actually that there is an issue when it comes to crime in our community. I'm sure you can all agree with that. And we want to discourage persons from taking the law into their own hands. And so we want to use a classroom. We want to educate persons about, what system is there, what the government has, in place to help us deal with the disputes and conflicts we may have with our neighbors. So the goal of this activity that we're going to be sharing with the students is for them to understand that the government has a system in place, that is the judicial system, to help us deal with the disputes and also to punish criminals. Now, this particular lesson, it is for senior students. These students are preparing for the CSEC Social Studies exam, and some of them may actually start working in a few months, or they may go into higher education. So it's very important for them to understand the system that is in place, because they will be entering the world of work. Now, the objectives, I did not say the topic. The topic for the lesson is actually structure of government. And so we're going to be focusing on the judicial system, and we have 3 specific objectives that we would like to cover with this assessment. The first one is to explain at least 3 functions of the judicial branch of government. The second, we want students to construct a diagram or model showing the judicial system. And lastly, we want them to understand the role of the judicial system in settling disputes. Now, how will we get our students to execute those? We have a group presentation planned, all right? And as you can see, there are actually 4 different tasks that we want the students to be able to show. Firstly, we want them to be able to outline the different jurisdictional privileges of the justice or magistrate over a named court. So the students would have already been introduced to the different courts within the court system. And now we want them to find out the different privileges that the justice may have. We also want them to distinguish between a criminal and a civil case. And they should be able to show the hierarchy of courts within the court system. And last but not least, we want them to actually discuss at least 2 issues that they may see within their community that is affecting the court system, and then to suggest 2 recommendations for improvement of the judicial system. Now, we have guidelines that we have also given to the students that they need to adhere to. We want to empower them. We want them to be able to show their creativity and motivate them at the same time. So we're encouraging the students to use different forms of media to be creative. They can even do a dramatization or a simulation. And of course, we want them to use reference materials that are factual. So government websites and also newspaper articles when presenting cases and that sort of thing. No, they will actually have 1 week to do this assignment, but the teacher will be with them, will be working with them. So whether it is an online case or a face-to-face setting, the teacher must provide guidance to them in this situation. And for each presentation, they're aware of their time limit. They would have 10 minutes. Now, all authentic assessments, as shown before by my colleagues, they must have a rubric. So the students will know exactly what it is that their project should have, what should be done. And so they can identify the amount of course that must be displayed, right? They should be able to use examples where possible, and also the number of issues or recommendations that they should show. So that summarizes the lesson that we would want to give to these students. If you have any comments or suggestions, we can discuss them now before we move on to mathematics.
Maybe you should go on, Candice,
Okay,
and then they'll take both together.
All right. So the mathematics lesson that we have, it's actually for grade 9 students. It's also face-to-face, and the topic is consumer arithmetic. Now, here is the problem. We want our students to be thrifty. We want them to be able to save. So the objectives for this particular lesson is for them to create a monthly budget. And then they will practice skills such as calculating costs, debt, interest, and so on. And we hope that after doing this activity, they can develop an aptitude for financial responsibility. So they can be responsible with the money that they have. Now, this is the activity that they're going to be doing. They're going to select a job that they may find interesting. Now, we know that most students at the grade 9 level, they will be preparing to choose their C-Sec subject. So they must have an idea what career they want to do. So they will select that job, and then they will be empowered to choose, to find out, you know, what type of earnings this particular job can get for them. And then the teacher now will provide different scenarios, lifestyle descriptions that the students can choose that they would want. Whether they would want to go out and eat 6 times a week, or use public transportation, or have a nice car. So they would choose from these different scenarios that the teacher provides. And then the teacher will also give them some lifestyle details, things that perhaps they didn't even think about as a part of adulthood. So the grocery lists, you know, bills, Netflix, you know, light bill, water bill, all of those things. So the students will have this information and they will use it to create their budget. Now, here are the guidelines. So students, again, are encouraged to do research. So they could use the internet, they can interview persons or go to the store and find out what are the costs of the different goods and services that they may require. And then they're going to calculate their cost of living. And the task now, they must be able to show how they would save, right? And they're going to actually, you know, indicate whether they have to use coupons or, you know, buy at a certain time of the month when there's a sale. And all of this information that they have collated, they would present it in a report. So they can choose a PowerPoint presentation or they can do a video. And this is an activity that can also be a group assignment. Now, there is a rubric, again, has to have a rubric. And if you notice on this particular rubric, the calculations part, it is actually 40% of the grade. Because calculations is so critical in mathematics, we decided to give that the most proportion. But the student can clearly look on the rubric because they would have access to it and they can see, you know, what they need to do to get their full marks. And again, the teacher would have to be there to provide guidance, whether virtually or if it's face-to-face in the class settings. So that concludes the math.
Thank you, Candice. Thank you very much. I'm Charmaine Bisessa. I'm Trinidadian, and I have been living here in Guyana, teaching at the University of Guyana for the past 2 years. I would like to ask you, well, I'll ask you the questions based on both lesson plans. I would ask you, what do you think authentic assessment essentially has to do with the utilitarian and personal value, and it transcends the assessment itself. How would you describe that for both assessments? Let's start first with the judicial system, that lesson, as well as the other one, the maths.
Well, one of the first, that is why we started with the problem. I am one of those teachers who really, I find constructivism to be a very important theory when it comes to teaching and learning. We want the student to understand their role within society. And within the Caribbean, crime and violence is an issue. So having the students appreciate and understand that it is vital, it is essential for them to, never take the law in their own hands and work with the system that is in place and support it, and perhaps even see themselves as a part of it, possibly becoming an attorney or a police officer. So within the social studies lesson, that vital attitude and acknowledgement that they're a part of a community and they have to support it, recognizing the role of the government. That would be where I see that. In terms of the mathematics lesson, we're talking about consumerism and thrift. And we are actually preparing these young people for, adulthood, for possibly having families of their own. So we're developing skills, we're developing employability skills, life skills, so that they can be more well-functioning adults in that situation.
Thank you very much, Candice. I think you more or less show, when you talk about developing life skills, you show that the assessment is meaningful. Both assessments are meaningful. I want to ask you something now about authentic assessment as it relates to being authentic assessment is normally product and process oriented. So based on your both assessments, can you tell me what aspects of them would be product versus process oriented?
Okay, well, we're starting with the social studies assessment, recognizing that social studies is a subject where, well, the course that these students are actually doing, they're preparing for a final, external examination where they will actually create a report. They have to do a SBA, studying a social problem, and they also have to do a written exam. So the activities are really writing. It is really literary work that must be produced. So in terms of the product, it's not a tangible product that will come out of the activity, but having the students develop these skills in terms of writing, putting information together, conducting research, that would be the goal and the outcome from that particular activity. And of course, within the process of working together, group collaboration, that's another aspect.
Okay, thank you. Now I'll ask if anybody else has questions that they would like to ask Candice or I.
I have a question.
Okay, somebody is saying something in the chat. What could have worked to is a scenario of a case or situation that ends in the court system. Students could be asked to demonstrate how the court system would be applied. So thank you for your suggestion. Somebody else has a question.
Hi, yeah, this is Kathy James Springer. I was looking at the math example in particular. One of the characteristics of authentic assessment would be that the student sort of takes on the role of gathering a lot of the information, and that the information really resonates to the student contextually. Now, in the version that is presented, what I'm noticing is that the teacher, I'm thinking this is secondary school students. So the student is to find a job that they are interested in. And then the student, the lifestyle description comes from the teacher. And also the details of the lifestyle would also come from the teacher. My question to Candice, is Candice? Yes. Would be, how would you turn this scenario around so that it becomes something that the students the students themselves can understand and relate to in terms of the lifestyle details and the description? How would you sort of turn this scenario? Because as it is now, it's still very much teacher-centered.
Well, this is an option. And, you know, as we were saying before, the students, we have to know the students that we have in the class. And so in a case where the students are unable to come up with this kind of information, because we could choose to have a class discussion where we identify these different things, these different aspects of our life that we can practice and the students can put it together, right? We could do that. But in some scenarios, we as teachers, we have to provide some support, some accommodation for those students who cannot. So certainly we could empower them to come up with these descriptions. What are some things that, you know, what type of lifestyle would you like to have? What do you anticipate? And we could have them put that information together. And then, you know, we could see, then we could say that it is authentic as you're saying. But at the same time, where we find that students cannot produce that information, teachers should still have that content to support.
So I think part of the scenario was that the students go interview somebody, correct? Or talk to
the option they can do.
Right. So one of the things I'm thinking in this case is perhaps they could draw some of the lifestyle details from their lives, from their parents, from their family, and not necessarily focus so much on the teacher giving them that information. I understand that some students may not be exposed to some of the things that are listed there, but perhaps even in the lifestyle details, if they go and research it or speak to other people, they may actually come up with other details that may not even be included in what the teacher is thinking, because really the teacher would be thinking from their perspective, from their lifestyle, or maybe something that they may have researched. So in terms of turning it around for the students so that it becomes relevant, I'm thinking in a family situation, perhaps this is a really good scenario for children to understand what it is parents do with money. I think it is an excellent opportunity, because a lot of kids just think money comes out of the sky. And so if they could kind of tease out these lifestyle details from parents, from family, they get a better understanding of how much money is spent on a lot of the things that go towards their upkeep, in a sense.
And if I can just jump in there, Candice, I noticed in the lesson activity, you did say students select a job that they find interesting. And that could also point to either a job or a scenario or something in the environment. So it's this indicate that it's also student driven. But as Candice outlined earlier too, it could be a collaborative event based on what she sees coming forth in the classroom.
Yes. And I think Shanice has a point that she wants to share.
I was listening to what Kathy suggested, and all of the points were good. But we also want to point out to the teachers that they're not just giving the students this activity and leaving them to work independently. So wherever the students may fall short, you would have to help them fill in those blanks. So the examples that we gave are for the students who may not know how to go about certain things. The teacher would have to fill in those blanks for them. And we can go both ways. The scenarios are there because we want to be able to cover all of the objectives. So some students may not include loans in their lifestyle because they have this idea that I'm not going to the bank for money. I don't need to go to the bank for money. But in reality, a lot of the people, working adults, have loans, whether it's for furniture or for academic pursuits that they had in the past. So we just wanted to make sure that they included that so that the interest and other aspects of consumerism like tax and stuff can come into play here for the students, because we don't want to have some students having all of these characteristics in their lifestyle and other students have less characteristics, and then they don't encounter how to calculate the interest on their loans and so forth. So I wanted to include the examples there to make sure that we covered all the bases.
And I think what is very important in what Shanice just said is, and I believe Leroy intimated it before, and when we were talking about the primary school example, is the idea of a social justice approach. sad to say that that's what we have to do today, where we have to consider every aspect of each of our students' environment and lifestyles. And addressing that very importantly, that if you put that they need to look at the grocery list and all of that, and the student does not have a weekly grocery list or a daily grocery list or whatever, or only has a meal once a day, you're making them feel disadvantaged.
Yeah.
In that way of responding to this assessment. So sometimes we need to step back and rethink and readdress how we design our assessments to make meaning within that child's life. Because some of our assessments could be telling them that they're deficient in their lifestyle in order to address their learning. So we need to be careful about that.
Thank you, Camille.
And I wanted to also just mention here that someone would have mentioned earlier on in the whole aspect of cultural responsiveness of assessment, and this is exactly what Camille just alluded to. In terms of being relevant, we have definitely to use means of evidencing that as well. So I know that in the chat it was mentioned different ways of doing it, and the whole idea of journaling and what we call portfolios and so forth. As hinted, we need to allow persons multiple means of being able to evidence how they're doing that, and so it's important that we have a very wide purview when you're looking at alternative and real world, because this is where individuals will now try and make that launch from what we do in school and what we do in the world of work. And we have to really measure and judge what is the best option for really allowing the students to capture that. Because at the end of the day, we know that a lot of institutions say, okay, you got 5 CX. What does that tell me? What can you as an educator do to allow students to see, okay, this is what you would have been able to do as a result of your school-based assessment? Yes, you got a grade for it, but the enduring thing is that you have something to show. You have something to show and demonstrate. So I think just to respond to that question about being culturally relevant, it's important to us as well that we do not divorce that your culture. I mean, I know sometimes we get some stuff told to us that includes always thinking the curriculum is the key, but as we know from a Dewey expert that the student is the curriculum, and so we should try as much as possible. And I hearing Joan mention that the whole idea of differentiation, the whole idea of being contextual, the whole idea of being, and it's difficult. It's difficult. I know as educators we definitely would say that's difficult, but we have to get there. We definitely have to get there.
There's a difference. I just want to elaborate. There's a difference between context and culture. We have to be very careful with those two words. There is a difference. Culturally, I feel very akin to Trinidad, but I have a different context in which I operate. We have to understand how that makes meaning for the student and the teacher in their environment. So when you are thinking about designing your assessment for your students, don't think about their culture that everybody should have a wok or some curry in their cupboard because they're living in Trinidad or wherever else. That's an assumption you're making, right? Context is a little more pertinent in that a child's context or your context matters, because how you live in your environment may differ from how your neighbors live in your direct environment. To be very careful with those two terms and how you employ them in your designs.
What is required among us as educators? Boy, it's a paradigm shift. The youngsters, they're a lot more advanced than we were at the same age because they have so much more available to them right now than we did. And that is good and it is also bad. But if we don't understand that their reality is very different from ours back then, we have a challenge. And I'm not just talking about special needs, because what I try to do quite a bit to get away from children feeling badly about their own situations, they're usually willing to dramatize different scenarios, whether it's theirs or not. and talk about the strength and the weaknesses of those various scenarios. So for example, I was shocked by some students when you're talking about different lifestyles and what, even though some of them belong to that particular lifestyle, and you know, the examples, they're a single male renting in the city, eats 6 times. It is amazing how they twist and turn that information and take all kinds of humor out of it. And another thing that we didn't talk about here today, but we must, as a part of our whole strategy to work with these kids, you better have a humorous side to you, because they don't play.
Oh,
They
jumped
play
out.
rough. And maybe I'm talking about boys because I work a lot of on. Oh, I'm coming out. My internet is unstable. Oh, Lordy.
Yeah.
Oh. It's still unstable?
No, keep going. Keep going. You're good now.
Okay, it's gonna come in and out. So I'm saying to keep up with them, and I confess that I'm talking primarily about boys because I work with a lot of boys. My son is in an all-boys school, and it is just, I've never seen anything like this. The way they tease each other, the way they talk about things, and a lot of humor too coming out of what they do. So when you talk about a single male renting in the city and all of that, one boy's going to jump over, gay. One boy's going, they're not focusing on the accounting anymore or whatever it is they're doing. They're going to tell you the whole lifestyle now and so on. But when they get serious about it and you ask them to plan different scenarios to get to all of the information that you want to get out there, this is where grouping is so important, because each group could be given a particular scenario and another scenario and so on. And they're able to demonstrate this. I remember working with some boys, they had to do something, it's come out of, it was a bio class. And so they had to do, present topic, it was about drugs. And one group had to do drugs, one group had to do birth control and so on. And the boys were very shy. They didn't want to talk about condoms and all of that. And what we had to do to get them to deal with it was something else. But we have to think differently. I see Candy smiling because these kids are ahead of us. Yes? And so we have to plan for them. My special needs children, what I find, I do a lot with them and training my teachers. Graphic organizers are such a great invention, let's call it that. Because, for example, my own son, you're talking about the difference between the criminal and the civil system. My son is not going to see it written. He has to see it in some graphic organizer that he can plug in the features of this one here, plug in the features of that one there, compare and contrast. I remember in third form, he wrote an essay looking at the challenges. It was on the Industrial Revolution and the Agrarian Revolution. And I left him alone because he was so interested in what the kids had to do, how they worked and so on in the during the Agrarian Revolution and the Industrial Revolution, that his teacher took the essay to fifth form and read it to them, claiming, this is how I want you to approach your history in CXC. Now, this is a boy that don't like a lot, you know, don't like to write, don't like a lot, but then he liked the whole idea of what was happening with these children and could explain all of that. So here again, when you're working with boys versus girls and all of that, and special needs and the gifted and talented who don't want to think in a particular kind of way and you're boring them to death, and I know that already, you have to, that paradigm shift is necessary so that you don't see everybody. A colleague said earlier, the one size fits all approach, they will throw it back at you. They will make you feel as if you didn't go to any college. Because sometimes my son comes home and he asks me, well, you know, I don't think such and such a teacher went to any college, you know. You sure, mommy? It's because they don't like the strategy being employed by that particular teacher. He came to me just yesterday and he said one that he was complaining about. He said, mommy, she's learning, you know, she's getting better. She's getting better. Why? because she's mastering the online teaching. She's having fun with them now, which was not happening. She's allowing them to talk up more on the online system than before, because at first she was gone back to, she didn't have chalk and talk to work with, but she just did it talk, talk, talk. So now things are improving. So be as creative as possible. I mentioned about breaking down the tasks. So we're talking about students pull a lifestyle description from a pool. As teachers, when we are summarizing based on the, and children love to present, whether it's PowerPoint, whether it's whatever point, they love to present. And when they present, they love that their peers are going to question them, and they are going to have to respond and defend what it is that they're doing. Give them scenarios to come. And then you can make notes now to say, did I get this, the grocery list thing? Did I get the favorite foods? Did I get all of that? At the end of the day, when you summarize all of that and you see that something was left out, you don't have to tell them. You don't have to give them. I know as teachers, you're protecting the knowledge that you want them to have because you're preparing for an exam. But if you see that something is missing, lead them to the water and let them drink. Don't give them don't just pour it in. Don't pour it in. Because if you're saying, we had 5 out of 6 things, which one you think is missing? What is missing that will make this complete? Lead them to what is missing so that the aha moment, yes? It's only as an adult that I realized that the 9 times table was so easy, because all of the numbers add up to 9, 7, and you add both of them and then they reverse. I discovered that as an adult, yes? Because all I ever did was to go learn 919, 928, 9327, 9430. That's what I learned. But then there's a pattern to the thing that we can let them understand. Similarly here, that you want them to learn certain things, lead them to discovering what it is. And if you find it's taking a little too long, there are ways and means that you can get them there. But once you tell them, they're not going to, half of the time, what is told to them, they're not going to remember. What they discover for themselves, what they interact with, what they go find out and so on, and what they learn from each other, because maybe another group got it, and then they're able to share. So trust them, they'll help you.
I just want to say, Joan, thanks for that. I think it's almost a precursor to what I was thinking. I was looking at this scenario, and my thoughts as I look at this scenario was how broad that scenario is. In other words, it's a math problem, but it takes the students into so many areas. It encompasses social studies, where they're looking at lifestyles and those sorts of things. It also takes them through that whole process. When I looked at the rubric, it was very much about the process of trying to calculate and the steps involved in actually carrying out that calculation. So just as a comment in terms of authentic assessment, one of the things that the advantages of authentic assessment seems to be that idea that you could kind of broaden the teaching. In other words, yes, for a particular course or subject area, you have a set of objectives that you would like to achieve or outcomes you would like to achieve at the end of that period. But it also helps you expand into other areas, because the students are looking at various areas. This scenario alone, they're looking at various areas of their life. They're looking at various areas of their family life, as well as achieving the goals of actually being able to calculate and do that budgeting, which is required for the math.
It's great. Thank you. Thanks all. I want to just ask, as we wrap up, these 3 stints, we call them stints where I do my work. I just want to say this part. Creativity is just as important as literacy. And Sir Ken Robinson, God rest his soul, recently died. He made this statement. If you look at his TED Talks, they're quite engaging, and they make you reflect about your practice on a day-to-day basis, about what you can do and what you shouldn't think about as you go forward. One question I would like each of the presenters, where I call them teachers as designers, which is Kanika, Amina, and Candace, to reflect on what did your designs look like before you presented them today? Before you knew you had to present on authentic designs and the process of changing it into an authentic design in maybe 1 minute each. What did your designs look like before? Because I think that is very key for the attendees today to see what the before process looked like and what the end of the process looked like.
Go ahead.
You can turn your video on as well. That's fine.
Can I go? Okay, thanks, Dr. Bristol. So definitely it would have been fewer choices, as well as not geared to stimulating the creativity so much. That's what I can say from a quick comparison.
Thank you. Kanika and Candace, as ECD and secondary school.
Well, this is Candice. Teaching government at the grade 10, 11 level, I think most teachers will agree that some students, they generally don't like the topic because they feel like it is abstract or it's far from them. They can't relate to it. And so even looking through the curriculum, looking at the lesson plan that was there, it was more teacher-centered before. And so the process for me was to consider how this could relate to the students, and what cases are out there that they could talk about to and relate to. So of course we look on Megan Stallion and Tory Lanez and all of these things that the students would know about. And the goal was to make them be able to choose how they could study this topic, how they could teach their classmates. And so with the structure of this assignment, I think that I try to give them liberty, to design, a method that they could share what they understood from it.
And did you feel that you relinquished some control?
Certainly.
I was hoping someone would say that word.
Certainly.
And Kanika,
Can you repeat the question? I was in and out.
what did your assessment look like prior to redesigning it for authenticity?
Well, I would say it was more centered on the teacher. There's more focus on the assessment than it being authentic in that sense. So it's just what the teacher wants from the assessment more than what the child should get out of it.
Okay, and if we remember now, just quickly put that slide back up as we go into questions, and we ask you guys to get ready for your questions, to post them in the chat, and we'll let you get the mic thereafter. But learning is not the product of teaching. Learning is the product of the activity of the learners. And each of what they just said in terms of their transition from their pre-redesign says that they need to think about that a lot to develop the work that they did. So now I'll hand over to Laurette for questions.
Thanks for that, Camille, and thanks for that, colleagues. It would be good if you can have your reactions to celebrate our teachers and designers from across the region representing Trinidad, Jamaica. I think Kanika is from Tobago, but there are lots of them who operated in a background that you did not hear this afternoon. We had some from St. Lucia and some other islands who operated in the background providing collegial support. Now, Dr. Paulette Henry is the one who's going to take us through the questions, but I just wanted to let you know that we are also creating the opportunity on Facebook. So those of you who are with us on Facebook, please post your questions on Facebook. They will be addressed in the session here. But we wanted to make things a little bit interesting and ask that if you do have a question, please click raise your hand. And when you raise your hand, we would actually open your mic and allow you to ask your question live. So with that, I'm going to hand back over to Dr. Paulette Henry. And Paulette, over to you.
Thanks, Laurette, and thanks, colleagues. Camille and team, an excellent job, excellent discourse. I saw that we were able to answer quite a number of the questions during this interactive conversation that we've had. So thanks to all of you participants. But there are two questions that I noted. One just came up, and there is one that I think we may have addressed to some extent, but I just want to throw it out back there. And the first one is, it was raised by, I think it was Annalicia. She wanted to find out from us, or she posed this this message in the chat, would authentic assessments have to be culturally relevant as well as practical in real life? And I know that we've had the discourse on content and culture, so, but I still wanted to raise that because she was the first person to pose a question there.
Okay, I'll take that question. And yes, you have, for a true authentic assessment, and I'm trying to get my video on so I can really look at you, but it's not working right now. For a true authentic assessment, I use the word context as opposed to culture. Mm-hmm. And the reason I use the word context, because it has a deeper meaning towards the student. Their immediate environment is what you're trying to get the student to relate to in your lesson, as opposed to culture, which is the celebration of the things that we do that traditionally everybody has in that region or that community, because each person's ability within that community may be different when you ask that child to respond. So it is very important that you use the word context. So when you design your assessments, think of the individual child. I always think of the one who does not have the most and design around that student. And then everybody else would fall in place. Does that help?
Mm-hmm. I think that contributed to a better understanding of that. There is another question that came from Dion, who's asking if or whether we included information literacy, or should we include that across the rubric of all the rubrics that we've had so far.
Not only information literacy, digital literacy. There's so many literacies now that we shy away from including for some reason. I'm not sure why. I studied in, I did a year in University of Connecticut with a professor called Donald Lehr, who was fighting at a time in the US to get digital literacy as part of the key curriculum, like math and English, that students as young as 3 years old will be allowed to use computers as they're learning. Now it's a little more easier. I mean, but when I did my PhD was years ago, decades ago. But that understanding of information literacy and what encompasses information literacy, not only just the digital technology, but searching, understanding how to use credible resources, all of those things that go into how you make a person valuable in this day and age, which is just not English and math as a foundation knowledge. Yes, I think you should. And when you do that, you would see that the top part of your Bloom's taxonomy it fills out. And you begin to look at other ways of expressions. Other ways of expressions allows you to use information literacy more deeply.
Thanks, Camille. There's another question here, and I think the person may have come in a little bit late when we talked about the early childhood. So the question is, what is the best method to use for authentic assessment with infants?
That is out of my league, Cecile or Joan.
We really don't like to assess.
Yeah.
Right. At that age, we don't like to assess our infants. Now, when you say infants, I assume you're speaking under the age of 2. So we don't really assess our infants. We provide them with the stimulation and what they need, but assessment really starts a little older. What you'd need to do is look at, while you're doing the stimulation, you are then taking into account as to how they are relating to what you're trying to do. So the more you stimulate the environment and the more you see them participate in it, then you can have an idea. If you see an infant who is not really engaging with the activity that you're doing with them, then you can begin to question and say, okay, maybe we need to, but assessment, we don't call it that at that young age. They're too young to be assessed. We usually wait until when they get a little older, which is why, if you notice, Kanika started her authentic assessment at, she indicated to you it was at age 3. The younger ones, we allow them and provide them with as much stimulation as possible and engage them as we go along and monitor and watch what happens. I hope that helped. Now at age 3, then we take them through the activities and we provide them with the opportunities to be engaged in the activities. And I noticed in the chat, you spoke a lot about STEAM and projects. At that age, we do learning through play. We do a lot of activities through play because that's how children learn. So you will set up the environment in a way that they can actually look around. You are staring it, but at the same time, you move towards helping them to, this is what we want to look at today, and they play through it. I'm noticing when someone says, I highly disagree with assessment. Yes, we don't assess young children. We don't. We set up the learning environment for them to grasp the concepts that we're trying to put about. But assessment is at a much later stage of life. If we are doing any form of assessment, it would be at age 4, and Joan can join me in this. And usually it is to find out if you notice that at that time your child is not grasping, say not looking at the colors, not engaging in the activities, then at that time you'd want to assess for a different reason, and it's not a full assessment. It is not, this early assessment and test taking at the early childhood level it's not recommended at all in the world of education and psychology, not for the development of children. Children need to develop on their own. So I hope that helped. I don't know if Joan wants to add to that.
I'm going to bring Joan in. Hold on.
I do apologize if I come in late. I'm multitasking with Laurette, so my apologies, everyone.
Go ahead, Joan.
Thanks for letting me back in. Yes, I guess in the broader definition of the word assessment, remember earlier I shared with you that one of the most powerful tools we have is really our observation of what is happening to our children developmentally and so on. So whereas we don't call it assessment, we are, for those children who are less than 2 years old, and I'll go even as far as 3, we're just making sure we have developmental checklists and so on. So we're making sure that as they grow, what are the more important things, or what are the cognitive skills they should be displaying, motor skills, and so on. So it's not really to ask a child, do this for me, sit up, walk, talk. No, it's observing if milestones have been met, and if they have not yet been met, what do we do to stimulate the child? So if this child is not yet sitting up at 2, is not yet creeping and so on, what are the things that we need to do and parents need to do to stimulate that child more so that you get the various milestones going? Or if they're really not happening, should we maybe have, depending on how delayed the child is. I have a friend who, he brought his daughter to me and she was past 1 year. old, and I lifted the little girl and she was floppy. She had no movement, she had nothing. And I said, did the doctor say anything to you? She was not making eye contact, there was no babbling, there was nothing happening. And he said, no, because they're poor and they're going to the clinic and it's next, next, next. So I said, take her back to clinic, ask the doctor to lift her up. There's no reflex action, nothing. And that's when the doctor said, oh my gosh, and put her in an early STEM program where she never learned to walk until she was about 4 or 5 years old. She learned to walk. So she was severely delayed. So we do look out for certain things, but this is not a test. It's more an using a checklist, using what we know best about children and their developmental sequence, what should happen when, and to see what we can do about it.
Thank you, Joan.
Paulette,
Jason, sorry?
We have some questions from Facebook, Paulette.
Yes, I'm going to Jason Patterson, who asks, to what extent do the authentic assessment hinder meeting deadlines or timelines on a broader scale in the context of timetabling? And so this person is asking about assessment in the context of all the other things that teachers have to do.
It's part of what we have to do when you create an assessment. I'm a little bit puzzled by the question. Maybe I'm just asking for more clarification. But don't you, the design of an authentic assessment is in alignment with a normal assessment. So the time when you create a normal assessment and you offer it within your timetable, within a portion of time, whenever, it's the same thing. You just need to think differently about how you assess. Maybe not do 10 objectives that they need to complete. Do 2 and make sure they're 2 in-depth ones. And if you do higher order thinking, you get the lower orders in there in terms of the understanding and the remembering and the application. Make them create something and it becomes a very meaningful assessment. So maybe I need some more clarification. Is it Jason? Or,
This is Jason Patterson. I think the question that follows that from Chanel is not different, because again, Chanel pointed to the heavy workload and what advice would you give in terms of assessment and covering, all that is required. But like you, Camille, and anyone else can jump in here as well, I am thinking that authentic assessment is a part of your work. Assessment is a part of the work. It's just that we're asking for you to consider doing it differently, doing it, in a way that is more engaging with the students and all the other scenarios that were shared earlier. So it's to ask us all in the education system as not to see it as more work, but to see it as exciting change with student engagement, more options for our students, looking at our context and what is relevant, what is going to be applicable, what they can apply to their own environment when they leave school, So that's my own thought,
Yeah,
but anybody else can jump in.
Yeah, I think all of us kind of rushing that one at the same time. But before Leroy jumps in, I think one of the things we need to draw to the attention of our teachers is that authentic assessment also support teaching for transferability. So actually you accomplish more out of the design of an authentic assessment than you would have accomplished in a traditional pencil and paper task where they just focus on that one issue, one item. Look at the examples that we've shared here today, and you can see the reach and the stretch of learning that the examples accommodate for. So in fact, taking the time up front, investing the time to develop an authentic assessment actually promotes integrated learning and allows you to advance your way through your curriculum, not just faster, but in more real ways where the behaviors of the students begin to change and are transformed over time. So I just wanted to point that out, because quite often we as teachers only think about the timetable and the syllabus, and we have to think more strategically. As they say, you don't work hard, you work smart. And as teachers, we have to begin to think more strategically about how we reach the end point in more authentic ways.
I think that person was also intimating it was an additional assessment. I got that from the way the question was worded, that it seems to be something added on to the assessment pool that you already have. No, we're not saying to add another assessment that's authentic. We're saying to look at the ones you already have, if you look at the stints or the examples we gave, and make it authentic. And that way you don't have an additional load. It's already encompassed into the load that you have. I hope that makes sense.
I think in addition to that, it also speaks, authentic assessments also affect the teaching approaches that we use. And so normally you would use that didactic approach where you would lecture or talk for the time that you are with the students. And always it's important to keep in mind in authentic assessment, a lot of it is student-centered. So the work you would have done as a teacher, we're talking it through, the students themselves would have found that content, found that information, and utilized it towards that assessment. So in a sense, as Camille is saying, it's not an add-on, it is part of your teaching, part of your assessment.
Yeah, and it's amazing how we are kind of resonating with similar things, because I was just gonna kind of throw this thing inside saying that content is not king. You know, is context, and we have to look at the process. We've all been saying that all along. And you can teach students those skills as to where do they get it, how should I present it, how do I collaborate, how do I do that. And I think that is more important than perhaps giving them the content, which is what I'm getting, and the whole idea of being perhaps tempted to give them the content and then test and see whether or not they know the content. I think it's a more or less a wider thing of mindset change that we need to think about, because at the end of the day is the whole idea of transferable skills, as was hinted, to be functional within the context of where they will be. And if we're not doing that, we need to question ourselves. And this is where I follow Engelstrom's work in boundary crossing with the whole work of academia and world of work. What are we doing? This is where I value the technical vocational a little bit in some instances, because they have those standards, competencies that persons will focus on, which are world-based context. So it begs us to really think differently. And if you notice, if you're doing things like authentic assessment for TVET and so forth, you know, it's not that different. When we find ourselves in trouble is when we actually move more to the academia side of things. And I think we definitely now seeing, because of COVID, we are seeing now the opportunity for us to really gravitate towards more of that thinking.
Thanks, Leroy. And I wanted to just refer back to what Candice had presented and Camille's comment on Candice's math examples, where she highlighted the fact that we were seeing social studies, math, and so many other things in that assessment that were applicable to the student's experience, that child's experience. So, you know, the whole assessment cuts across so many disciplines, and it actually is important for the student because they can now apply it to their context. The last two questions, colleagues, was someone going to say something? Sorry. If no,
go ahead.
The last two questions are talking about the virtual learning environment. And one person posed here is, how can we ensure that the student's work is truly his or hers without too much outside assistance and influence? And how can we assess the genuineness of the authenticity?
And
that's
I would
one.
So that could we answer that first? And I would like, so what a lot of people don't know is the presenters today, Amina, Kanika, and Candace were in my Masters of IDT program with UE, fully online, and they can attest that all of their assessments were authentic. And I would like them to say, did they do their work? And they can profess, they can say it, they can, and I don't think I'm an easy teacher. So they
No, you're not.
say, no, you're not, right? So did they do their own work and did they feel the need to do their own work? That's my question to them in the assessments that they were assigned. They're very shy now.
Are they going to go?
Let me go first. Absolutely. I did
Shani
do
said,
my
yes,
own
we
work.
did.
Absolutely. And I think it is a very important question that many of us would have when we assign assessments to our students online. And when I was doing my master's with Dr. Dean, we always had discussions, whether it were discussions online in terms of using one of these platforms or within the LMS itself. We always had discussions, and I think that is one of the ways in which as teachers we could engage our students, and based on how they respond to us, we will know whether they actually did the work or not. So if I go back to the social studies example, if I had to have my students submit that to me online, I will not just take it and use the rubric against what they submit. I would have a discussion with them. And I think that would ensure that it is a genuine submission from my students, because obviously if the child did the work, he or she would be able to respond to my questions and carry on an informative discussion about what was done.
And that goes to Alicia Lawrence's question that you guys are adult learners. And the reason why I'm saying that, and I am asking you, is because you guys are adult learners, but you're also primary school and secondary school teachers. So you have implemented everything you've learned to them, because we all learn, regardless of the age now, the same way. The brain works the same way, and the expectations are the same. Yes. So I'm mindful of the time though, Paulette.
Yeah.
Yes.
I wanted to add that in the event that we really want to, we've seen situations where you could actually present the content asynchronously, or using a flip learning, and then the actual sense making and group thinking, group cognition, or even the homeworking can be done in school, to kind of, because I let's face it, a lot of parents do the homework, a lot of parents do the and you question whether or not the students actually learn. So it's a reality, and I think in reality, in think we have to kind of unlearn some of the things that we've been doing, and using technology, you can certainly present some of the content to the students outside the four walls of the classroom. You need to kind of demystify that, because students learn so many different ways, and you get them to work together in the classroom to actually see, and that's where you can actually have the group and peer assessment and peer evaluation components that is valued. So that's how I would address it. And again, you see that it fits nicely within that lower edge part of the pyramid, because you can certainly do a little quiz and they go home and and that's fine. But I think the real deep, and I think it was hinted earlier on, the whole idea of critical thinking. We have to be mindful of that. And how do we encourage that? We need to be looking at how you design your assessments to allow for that to take place.
So I wanted to go to the final two questions, and we are conscious of time. But one asks about how do we, as we move in this online learning environment, address persons or students with different learning abilities. And the final one asks whether our region is going to be moving towards a more authentic assessment for our students.
For external
I
exams.
don't think we can answer the last one. I don't think we have that oracle or the power for that one. It's hopeful. It's hopeful,
It's
right?
hopeful indeed.
It's,
Yes.
we always have hope, but I don't know if we have the powers to answer that last one. But the first one, if you could refresh my memory is really short. It's early in the morning here.
Yes. The first one asked about how do we assess, how do we help students with different learning abilities as we negotiate our new learning online learning environment.
Authentic assessments helps with this, very much so. That area where we had that choice, that negotiation of choice, when you're talking about abilities, I'm assuming you're talking about visual and auditory, which I don't really teach to let students, because not everything you can pick a student's preference of learning for them to learn the content. Content needs to be learned the way the content is designed, as first and foremost. When they have different learning abilities and so people may have different lengths of period in which they can learn. So it takes me a lot longer to learn a language than it would take me to learn a math or physics kind of technical kind of question. So my learning ability for languages tend to skew on the very short patience, not much time, very frustrated very quickly. Whereas with math, very short time, I'm good, I'm done, I'm moving on, right? Both of them based on my time limit. When you're designing that with authentic learning and you're understanding the different abilities, you give them that choice in there. That's the wiggle room of choice. You don't have to let them choose from anything, which is a broad range, and you can do that as they get older. But when they're younger, give them 3 or 4 or 5 examples, or let them bring examples, and you say to the class, okay, here are the examples, make a choice from these examples. But that helps them, and that shows you their abilities immediately as to how they can be addressed in the classroom. Anyone else wants to expound? Because I'm looking at the time.
Camille, I think what we can probably do out of respect for the time, and if we agree, we could probably move on to the next, section, which is the wrap up.
Yep.
Yeah. That's good. Sure. So I'm going to do things a little bit different. I know oftentimes when we think about the wrap up, we think about let me just say thanks to Paulette. Paulette, thank you so much for taking us through this very engaging and interactive Q&A session. I think we could keep going, but we have to kind of wrap up. And you see the names of our team. It was quite a big team. It was a mammoth task that we had to undertake, and I'm so happy to be a part of the team. So I'm going to ask 5 persons from the team, okay, any 5 persons, and of course I may have to unmute you, so you have to let me know who wants to be unmuted, to share one word that comes to mind when we reflect upon this experience, this encounter today in this environment. And when you articulate that one word, tell us why very quickly as a message to take away that all of us need to take with us as we go on engaging and raising and caring and supporting our region as we move towards 2020, realizing the mission of the CARICOM Human Resource Development Strategy. That is increasing and supporting the potential of our people in the region. So 5 members of our team. Whoever wants to go first, one word that you can take away, explain as a takeaway message for all of us as we go on. Okay, so Charmaine, I'm going to go ahead, Charmaine, and my other colleagues could tell me by the time. Go ahead, Charmaine, very quickly.
I have 2 words, social justice, and I think after all this discussion, I value the importance of social justice. And in fact, in our meeting when we discussed it, when I met with Candace and we discussed it, we realized it was an issue for one of the assessments. So that would be my word, social justice.
Thanks for that, Charmaine. Leroy?
Mine is in the chat. I mean, it was just a word, mind change. I just have mind change.
Tell us why.
Mind change because we wouldn't get authentic unless we are thinking in an authentic way in terms of being real with our students, with what they experience, and that include understanding their context, being respectful to their situation, understanding that students are not necessarily connected, and we didn't touch some of that. They have and they have nots. I mean, the digital divide is something that affects all of us. And those who are connected, bandwidth, even right now, we saw the bandwidth issues. So I don't want us to think that the technology is and newness is always about the learner, and we need to be contextual and thinking contextual in that. So it's a mind change. I know we are pressured to use different devices, different tools and so forth, which is okay. But as Camille would have mentioned repeatedly, we need to think of the student with the lowest, another thing that was not thinking is the whole idea of accessibility. And so we definitely need to be thinking, how do I assess to ensure that every student is given an equal? And that is difficult if you're not an authentic person. So that, to me, that is why I say mind change. Some of us just have to change our mind, a whole different mindset.
Thanks for that, Leroy.
Yeah,
now we have Judith Jackson, who participated in this session. Judith actually wanted to tell us what happened, one word. So Judith, I'm going to open your mic and allow you to give us your one word, and you have to tell us why very quickly. Go ahead, Judith. Maybe Judith is having challenges with her mic.
It's just
all right. So that's
Charmaine.
Go ahead, Camille.
There's Charmaine in the chat as well with her hand up, and Tristana.
Charmaine, help. Paulette and Tristina.
Tristina.
Okay, good. Charmaine, go ahead.
Sorry.
Sorry, Charmaine, help. Go ahead, Charmaine. Okay, Paulette, you go ahead because Charmaine is not unmuting her mic yet. Paulette, go ahead.
I wanted to use the word choice and to say it's an integral part of authentic assessment. And we have the choice now to do different, to be different, and to explore difference, and to collaborate in making those intentional choices that will give our students the opportunities to be better citizens of our countries. I saw that in some of the presentations, and to do good for our region. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Paulette. So Charmaine's mic is open. Now go ahead, Charmaine.
I don't have a last word. I was asking a question earlier. But I was saying that I'm a sixth form teacher, and I was just wondering how the authentic assessment will coincide with CXC's way of marking. But
that's a big question, Charmaine.
Yes.
Out of our league.
Not for the place here. So I'm going to go to Tristana, and then we'll close up. Tristana.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon. I don't really have, I don't have a word, but for me, it would have been something nice for officials, if it would have been something nice for officials to take part, for them to see what is really going on, not only here in Guyana, but outside, and that things could be, put in place here, because some of the things that I'm hearing here this afternoon, I am kind of in awe of it. So I think it would have been something that would have been really good, not only for the teachers, because teachers are here presently, and there's only so much that teachers can do without getting permission, or getting support from the people in the decision-making position. So it would be something nice that you can put out there, towards the people in decision-making positions.
Thanks for that, Tristana. I think what you've raised is a question of teacher agency, which is something that we all struggle with all the time. It's one of my pet topics. And teachers have a lot more, without drawing it on, teachers have a lot more agency than they think. And maybe there is still work for us to be doing in the region around that. I'm seeing some very positive feedback in the chat, and I'm very pleased. Thank you for that, colleagues. Thank you for participating. We have a choice to make, and that's the word that keeps echoing as I think about every single example that was shared. And the word that kept, apart from context, and context being contextual, and also being culturally relevant, which is distinct from being contextual, apart from making shifts from content to competencies, the need to be open and be creating environments that are safe for failure and risk-taking to lead towards creativity and innovation. That could only happen when we execute that choice. We all have choices as teachers to engage with the paradigm shift that is required. And we have, in order for us to help our students to realize their fullest potential, we too have to create opportunities and spaces for them to begin to make choices and direct their own learning. So colleagues, Camille, thank you very much. It's very, very early for you in Sydney. I know what it feels like. And to all our other colleagues from across the region who came in, many of them on the last occasion and short order came in and supported the planning team. To our teachers, our practitioners in the classroom, you did something that many of us are not prepared to do. You risked yourself, and you risked yourself in such a way that you supported and enabled the learning of not just yourself, but your colleagues and your peers in the region. And just to follow on from a post that I saw Leroy made in Facebook, the teachers are now the learners, and that's dislocating and it's uncomfortable. And we all found ourselves in this space where the quote unquote experts became the learners in the environment. So thank you, everybody. Have a blessed weekend, because we won't talk to you tomorrow. Please look out. We will be sending you the e-booklet via email. It will come to you. We just have to finalize and tighten up some details related to the e-booklet. So please look out for that. We will share that. And the e-booklet has many more examples than the one shared here today. So thanks, everybody, and keep your eyes on the prize. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody.